The calm before the storm. Lieutenant Marcus Ellis adjusted his crisp uniform as he stepped into his new Chevy Tahoe, the black paint gleaming under the soft rays of the evening sun. It had been a long day filled with paperwork, meetings, and the usual grind of military life. Yet, as he pulled away from the base, a sense of relief washed over him. He was looking forward to a quiet evening, perhaps a few chapters of his favorite book or a movie marathon with his family. Little did he know that fate had other plans. As Marcus drove along the deserted highway, the world outside the window transformed into a blur of greens and browns. The tranquil scenery contrasted sharply with the chaotic world he sometimes found himself navigating as a black lieutenant in the armed forces. Over the years, he had faced countless challenges, from rigorous training exercises to the battles fought in foreign lands, but nothing prepared him for what awaited him on this fateful night. Suddenly, the stillness of the evening shattered as bright flashing lights erupted in his rearview mirror. The sudden jolt of anxiety surged through him as he instinctively pressed down on the brake pedal. His heart raced as he pulled over to the side of the road, his mind racing through the possibilities. Had he done something wrong? He glanced down at the speedometer. He had been well within the limit. As he sat there, gripping the steering wheel tightly, Marcus remembered the countless conversations he'd had with his fellow soldiers about their encounters with law enforcement. The stories often hovered around a dangerous undercurrent of fear and tension, especially for those wearing a uniform that symbolized their commitment to serve and protect. Taking a deep breath, Marcus reminded himself to stay calm. He was a soldier, trained to handle stressful situations. But as he watched two officers approach his vehicle, their demeanor set off alarm bells in his mind. Their faces were contorted with a mix of aggression and suspicion, making Marcus's stomach churn. "Keep your hands where I can see them," one officer barked, while the other shouted conflicting orders to exit the vehicle. Confusion flooded Marcus's mind. He was torn between the ingrained respect for authority and the unsettling feeling that something was horribly wrong. With trembling hands, he raised them high, a gesture of surrender and compliance. "I'm Lieutenant Marcus Ellis," he stated, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing inside him. "I'm currently on duty and—" Before he could finish, the officers interrupted him with shouted commands, their faces twisting into masks of hostility. "Get out of the car. Now." The sharpness in their voices felt like a knife, cutting through the thin veneer of respect he'd hoped to maintain. Marcus's training kicked in, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. He felt a chill creep down his spine, realization dawning that the badge he wore, once a symbol of honor and duty, offered him no protection in this moment. "Sir, I'm complying," he tried to explain, his voice filled with disbelief. "I'm just trying to tell you." "Out of the vehicle," one officer shouted again, their tone filled with unrestrained fury. Marcus could hardly comprehend the situation spiraling out of control. In his mind, he struggled to reconcile the duty he had sworn to uphold with the aggression being directed at him by those who were supposed to serve alongside him. Amidst the rising tension, he felt a flash of instinct, his phone. He could document this encounter, he thought, ensuring that there was a record of what was happening. This simple decision, made in a split second, would soon prove crucial. Reaching for his phone, Marcus felt a burning sensation as one of the officers lunged toward him. A cloud of pepper spray erupted into his face, blinding him and causing him to gasp for breath. He blinked rapidly, tears streaming down his cheeks as pain engulfed his senses. The reality of his situation crystallized in that moment. He was no longer the lieutenant commanding respect. He was a target. "Why are you doing this?" he managed to croak out, his heart racing as he struggled to regain his bearings. He could barely see through the haze, but the aggressive stares of the officers pierced through the pain, their expressions filled with contempt and something darker. They yanked him from his vehicle, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his wrists as they forced him onto the pavement. The world around him spun, a disorienting blend of chaos and despair. It felt surreal. He had done everything right, followed every protocol, And yet here he was, being treated like a criminal. As he sat on the curb, bewildered and in pain, Marcus's mind raced with thoughts of his family. His mother had always warned him about how the world could view him differently because of his skin color. Growing up, she instilled in him the importance of respect and compliance. But in this moment, it all felt futile. He had dedicated his life to serving his country, and yet, on this American street, he was nothing more than a target for violence and humiliation. The moments stretched on endlessly, a blur of pain and confusion. He was bombarded with questions from the officers, their words laced with accusation and disdain. What were you doing? Why did you pull over? The hostility was palpable, each word striking him like a blow. Please, I'm a soldier, Marcus pleaded, his voice trembling. I'm trying to explain. I've served my country with honor. But his words fell on deaf ears. The officers remained unmoved, intent on treating him like a criminal rather than the decorated lieutenant he was. As the burning sensation in his eyes began to fade, a new reality set in. This was not just about him. This was about something much larger. It was a symptom of a systemic issue that plagued countless others, especially those who didn't have the platform or the voice to fight back. Sitting there, still handcuffed and hurting, Marcus made a decision. He would not let this injustice go unanswered. He would fight for himself, yes, but more importantly, he would fight for every individual who had ever been victimized in a similar way. He would use his experience, his uniform, and his voice to shine a light on the dark corners of a system that allowed such abuse to occur. As the sound of sirens filled the air, signaling the arrival of help, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning of his battle. The chaos of that evening had ignited a fire within him, a fire that demanded change, understanding, and justice, and he was determined to make sure it would not be extinguished. The aftermath. The blaring sirens of the approaching police cars filled the night air, drowning out the chaos that had just erupted around Lieutenant Marcus Ellis. As the officers continued to question him, the world around him became a surreal blur. It felt as if he were watching a scene from a movie, one in which he was not only the lead character, but also the unknowing victim. Finally, the arrival of the paramedics broke through the confusion. They rushed to his side, concern etched on their faces. One of them knelt beside him, quickly assessing the situation. What happened? The medic asked, glancing at the officers, then back at Marcus, whose eyes were still stinging from the pepper spray. I was pulled over, and Marcus began, but the words got tangled in his throat as a wave of emotion washed over him. He had always prided himself on his composure, but now vulnerability pierced through the armor he had built around himself over the years. The paramedic, noticing his distress, continued to work. Let's get you cleaned up, he said gently, preparing a saline solution to wash out Marcus's eyes. Just breathe. As the cool liquid trickled down his face, washing away the remnants of the pepper spray, clarity began to return. The physical pain was gradually easing, but the emotional turmoil was just beginning. The officers were still barking orders at one another, and Marcus's mind raced with the implications of what had just occurred. He couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was more than just a random traffic stop gone wrong. It felt like a calculated display of power, a stark reminder of the systemic issues that plagued his community, and more importantly, the men and women who wore the same uniform he did. Once his eyes were clear, Marcus was escorted to the back of an ambulance. The paramedics asked a few more questions, but their eyes told him they understood. They had seen it before, the intersection of race, authority, and violence, and he could sense their empathy. "Lieutenant, you're going to be okay," one of the medics assured him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Just take it one step at a time. We'll get you the help you need." But Marcus didn't want just help, he wanted justice. As he sat there, heart pounding, he thought about the countless stories he had heard from fellow officers and community members. Stories of unwarranted aggression, of being treated as less than human, and of feeling like their lives were expendable. He would not become just another statistic. Once the paramedics finished their assessment, they allowed him to sit up and collect himself. The officers had stepped back, but were still within earshot, their conversation animated. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to ground himself, but he could still hear snippets of their words, laced with mockery, as if they were discussing some common criminal rather than a decorated soldier. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on his chest. As he pulled out his phone, the memory of the earlier panic flooded back. He had documented the entire encounter, from the initial traffic stop to the chaotic aftermath. It was a small comfort, knowing he had a record of the truth, but it also came with the heavy burden of what that truth could mean. As the police cleared the scene, Marcus noticed one officer looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Was it guilt, remorse, or something darker? But before he could contemplate further, they started to walk away, leaving him to face the aftermath alone. "Lieutenant, we're going to have to ask you some questions," one of the officers said, now with a tone that was slightly less aggressive, but still rife with tension. "Can you tell us what happened tonight?" Fighting back a surge of anger, Marcus knew this was not the time to allow emotions to dictate his responses. He focused on articulating the facts of the incident, recounting the sequence of events as calmly as he could. "I complied with your commands," he stated firmly. "I identified myself as a lieutenant, and yet I was treated like a criminal. I don't understand why this happened." The officer hesitated, glancing at his partner, who had been scribbling notes. "Look, it's not personal. We have procedures, and sometimes it can get intense during a stop. You understand, right?" "No," Marcus replied, his voice steady but firm. "What happened tonight is not just intense. It's an abuse of power. You treated me like a threat when I was simply doing my duty." The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard. "We'll look into it," he muttered, but his words felt empty, devoid of any real commitment to accountability. As the officers left, the sense of isolation washed over Marcus. He was still in shock, but he also felt a growing determination. He wouldn't let this go unnoticed. He began to plan his next steps, considering how to take action. Later that night, once he returned home, Marcus felt the weight of the day pressing heavily on his shoulders. He walked into his living room, where his wife, Jessica, was waiting, her face a mask of worry. "Marcus, what happened? I saw the news reports, and they mentioned a lieutenant getting pulled over. Are you okay?" He took a deep breath, grateful for her presence, but feeling the urge to shield her from the ugliness he had faced. "I'm fine, Jess," he said, forcing a smile. "It was just a misunderstanding." Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "A misunderstanding that made the news. Tell me the truth." Her concern pierced through his defenses, and Marcus finally relented, recounting the details of the incident. He watched as her expression shifted from worry to disbelief, and finally to anger. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. They assaulted you." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, but we have to stay calm. If we make a fuss, it could affect my career." "Your career? What about your safety? This isn't just about you anymore. This is about everyone who has faced this kind of injustice," she retorted, her passion igniting a spark in him. Her words echoed in his mind as he pondered the bigger picture. "You're right," he admitted, the fire of determination reigniting within him. "I can't stay silent. I need to take action." The next morning, Marcus contacted an attorney specializing in civil rights cases. As he prepared for the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just a personal fight. It was part of a larger struggle against the systemic racism that had plagued his community for generations. He had spent years defending his country abroad, but now he needed to defend himself and others at home. As he sat in the attorney's office, he laid out the details of the incident, his heart racing as he recounted each moment of humiliation and fear. The attorney listened intently, jotting down notes. "What you experienced is unacceptable, and we can fight back," he said. "We can file a complaint, but it will require courage and resolve on your part." "I'm ready," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for everyone who has ever faced this kind of treatment. We need to expose the truth." The attorney nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "Then let's get to work." The fight for justice. The following weeks became a whirlwind of activity for Lieutenant Marcus Ellis. The initial shock of the incident had transformed into a fervent determination to seek justice, not just for himself, but for all those who had faced similar injustices. He worked closely with his attorney, David Reynolds, a seasoned civil rights lawyer known for taking on difficult cases. Together, they meticulously gathered evidence, starting with the video recording that Marcus had made during the traffic stop. David emphasized the importance of transparency in cases like this, knowing that every detail could help illuminate the broader issues at play. "This isn't just about you, Marcus. It's about a system that's failing countless individuals. Your voice could spark a much-needed conversation," he reminded him. Marcus reviewed the footage multiple times, reliving the humiliation he had faced. He felt a mixture of anger and resolve as he watched the officers' aggressive behavior and their blatant disregard for his service. "I can't let this happen to anyone else," he muttered under his breath, his fists clenched. To broaden the impact of their efforts, David suggested organizing a press conference to share Marcus's story publicly. "Your experience could resonate with so many who've been silenced," he said, excitement bubbling in his voice. "We need to create a platform for dialogue, one that encourages change." The idea both thrilled and terrified Marcus. He had never imagined standing in front of cameras, recounting the trauma he had faced. But he recognized that the moment called for courage. It was a necessary step in dismantling the fear and stigma surrounding such incidents, and he couldn't back down now. As the date for the press conference approached, Marcus worked tirelessly to prepare his statement. He wanted to ensure that his words conveyed not only the gravity of his situation, but also a message of hope. He spent countless evenings drafting and refining his speech, rehearsing in front of Jessica, who supported him every step of the way. On the day of the press conference, a palpable sense of tension hung in the air. Marcus stood behind the podium, the bright lights illuminating his face as reporters and cameras surrounded him. He could hear the murmurs of the crowd as they awaited his words. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if his message fell flat? What if they didn't understand? But as he looked out into the sea of faces, he remembered the countless stories he had heard from friends and colleagues who had faced similar encounters. He reminded himself of his purpose and the importance of breaking the silence. With a deep breath, he steadied himself and began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lieutenant Marcus Ellis, and I stand before you today not just as a soldier, but as a victim of an unjust system. Recently, I experienced a traumatic event during a routine traffic stop, where I was subjected to aggression and violence by officers sworn to protect me." As he spoke, he recounted the details of the incident, his voice unwavering. He described the conflicting orders, the moment he reached for his phone to document the encounter, and the pepper spray that blinded him. The room grew quiet, hanging on his every word. "This experience shook me to my core," he continued, "not just because of what happened to me, but because it reflects a larger issue that affects countless individuals across our nation. I am here today to stand for justice, to say that this is not just my fight, but the fight of every person who has ever been treated with contempt and disrespect by those in authority." As he finished his speech, the applause from the crowd surged through him, filling him with a sense of purpose. Reporters clamored to ask questions, and Marcus felt an unfamiliar mix of adrenaline and clarity. This was his moment to shine a light on the issues that had long been obscured. In the days that followed, the press conference garnered significant media attention. News outlets covered the story extensively, and social media platforms exploded with hashtags supporting Marcus and advocating for change. People shared their own stories, echoing his sentiments, and the movement grew louder with every passing day. Despite the outpouring of support, Marcus was also met with resistance. Some in the police community questioned his motives, labeling him a traitor for speaking out. Anonymous letters began to arrive at his home, filled with threats and intimidation. "Why are you putting your family at risk, Marcus?" a fellow officer asked during a tense conversation at the precinct. "You're making us look bad." Marcus felt the weight of their disdain, but he remained steadfast. "It's not about making anyone look bad. It's about addressing the truth. If we don't confront these issues, we are complicit in allowing them to continue." The more he stood firm in his convictions, the more he inspired others within the department to speak out as well. Slowly, a shift began to occur. Officers who had once been silent started to share their own experiences and advocate for change. Realizing that the conversation needed to extend beyond the precinct, Marcus and David organized community forums, inviting residents and officers alike to share their stories and perspectives. They aimed to bridge the gap that had formed between law enforcement and the community, fostering understanding and accountability. One evening, at a local community center, Marcus stood at the front of a packed room, feeling the mix of nerves and excitement. He was there to facilitate a discussion on race, justice, and reform in policing. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, and as he looked around, he saw faces filled with hope and skepticism. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "This is an opportunity for us to come together, to share our stories, and to understand one another better. We all want to feel safe in our community, and that begins with dialogue." As people began to share their experiences, the stories poured forth, stories of fear, pain, and disillusionment. Marcus listened intently, connecting with each person's narrative. He saw firsthand the scars that systemic issues had left on their lives, and it deepened his resolve to fight for justice. Amidst the crowd, he noticed a young woman named Aisha, who had come forward to speak. "I've faced discrimination every day of my life," she said, her voice shaking but powerful. "It's like being invisible in plain sight. No one believes my story, and I'm tired of feeling this way." Marcus stepped forward. "Aisha, your voice matters. It's vital that we amplify these stories so that everyone understands the reality many face daily. This isn't just a personal battle. It's a collective fight for change." The discussion continued late into the night, a mixture of tears, laughter, and moments of deep reflection. By the end of the evening, there was a palpable sense of unity, a commitment to work together toward change. Marcus realized that what had begun as a personal struggle had blossomed into a community movement, one that held the potential to reshape the narrative around policing and race. As he left the community center that night, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had started this journey feeling isolated and overwhelmed, but now he stood as a beacon of hope, an advocate for change. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but he knew he wasn't alone. He had a community rallying behind him, and together, they could forge a path toward justice. The turning point. As the movement grew, so did the pressure on Lieutenant Marcus Ellis. He was no longer just a soldier fighting for justice. He had become a symbol of hope and resilience for many. The community events he facilitated were well attended, and the conversations sparked were enlightening. However, with every victory came new challenges. The louder the call for reform grew, the more resistance Marcus faced from within the police force and beyond. One evening, after a particularly successful community forum, Marcus received a call from his attorney, David. "Marcus, I have some news. It seems the police union is planning to take a strong stance against you and your advocacy. They're not happy with the media coverage and the way you're shining a light on these issues." The weight of those words settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders. What does that mean for us? Are they going to try to silence me? They're trying to frame your actions as divisive, suggesting that you're undermining the very fabric of law enforcement. It's a strategy to discredit you and the movement. David replied, his voice steady yet concerned. "But we have the truth on our side, Marcus. We need to keep pushing forward." Marcus felt a surge of anger. How could they twist his desire for justice into something negative? Yet he knew this was part of the battle. Those in power would fight to maintain their status quo. He took a deep breath and resolved to remain focused on the mission. Over the next few weeks, Marcus intensified his efforts. He reached out to local organizations and activists, planning a larger event to rally support for police reform. He envisioned a community-wide march, one that would bring together people from all walks of life to stand united against injustice. "We need to show them that our voices are stronger than their attempts to silence us," he told David during their brainstorming sessions. As preparations began, the excitement in the community was palpable. Flyers were distributed, social media campaigns launched, and local businesses offered their support. Families, students, and community leaders began to mobilize, and the event quickly gained momentum. Yet, with this growth came an increase in hostility. Anonymous threats surfaced online, targeting both Marcus and his supporters. The police union released a statement accusing Marcus of using his uniform to promote a personal agenda. "This is not what our community needs," they declared, urging the public to dismiss his claims. Despite the negativity, Marcus remained resolute. "I'm not going to let them intimidate me. This isn't just about my story anymore. It's about changing the system," he told Jessica one evening as they reviewed the final details of the march. On the day of the march, the sun shone brightly, illuminating the streets as a diverse crowd gathered. From families with young children to elders who had witnessed the civil rights movement, people from all walks of life joined together, their voices resonating with a singular purpose. Marcus stood at the front, flanked by community leaders and activists, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. This was not just a march, it was a movement. As they began to walk through the streets, chants filled the air, and colorful signs waved like banners of hope. "Justice for all," "Stop the violence," and "We are one," echoed around him, drowning out the darkness of fear and intimidation. He felt empowered, knowing that they were making history. But as the march progressed, Marcus noticed a police presence growing. Officers lined the sidewalks, some with stern faces, others with a mix of confusion and curiosity. It was a stark reminder of the divide that still existed between law enforcement and the community. Marcus knew that while they were there to maintain order, their presence could also be perceived as a threat. As the march reached its destination, a local park where a rally was planned, Marcus stepped onto the stage, the crowd cheering him on. He looked out at the sea of faces, their hopes and aspirations reflected in their eyes. "Today, we stand together not just for ourselves, but for those who have come before us and those who will come after us. We demand change. We demand accountability." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of energy surging through the park. Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. "We are here to hold our leaders accountable, to demand transparency, and to advocate for a system that protects and serves all members of our community equally." As he spoke, he saw some of the officers who had initially opposed him watching from a distance. He recognized Officer Linda Carter, a veteran officer known for her integrity. Their eyes met, and Marcus felt a moment of understanding pass between them. He hoped that perhaps, despite the divisions, there was a way to bridge the gap. After the rally, Marcus was approached by a young man named Jason, who had been inspired by his courage. "You're making a real difference, Lieutenant. I've been afraid to speak out, but seeing you take a stand gives me hope." "Thank you, Jason. Your voice matters just as much as mine." "Together, we can create a change that lasts," Marcus replied, encouraged by the growing enthusiasm around him. As the days turned into weeks, the march and rally continued to gain traction, sparking discussions not only within the community, but also across the nation. News outlets began to cover the story more extensively, with debates surrounding policing practices and accountability flooding the airwaves. Marcus felt both exhilarated and exhausted. The fight was far from over. However, amidst the progress, the backlash from the police union intensified. They organized press conferences to counter Marcus's narrative, accusing him of promoting a dangerous agenda. "We're trying to protect our community, and this is how he repays us," an officer said during one heated exchange. Despite the escalating tensions, Marcus maintained his commitment to dialogue. He knew that true change required understanding and collaboration, even when faced with hostility. To that end, he proposed a series of meetings between community leaders and police officials, aiming to foster open communication and address grievances. The first meeting was scheduled for the following month, and as the date approached, Marcus felt a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Would the officers show up with open minds, or would they arrive ready to defend the status quo? On the day of the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. Community leaders, activists, and officers gathered in the local community center, the air thick with unspoken fears and hopes. Marcus stood at the front, determined to facilitate a constructive conversation. "We're here today to listen to each other, to understand the challenges we face, and to find a way forward together," he said, hoping to set a positive tone. As the meeting progressed, voices were raised, emotions ran high, and there were moments of vulnerability and frustration. Some officers shared their experiences, highlighting the challenges they faced daily, while community members shared their stories of fear and injustice. In one powerful moment, Officer Carter stood up. "I've been on the force for over 15 years. I joined to make a difference, but I've seen things that make me question everything. I want to do better, but I need you to help us understand what we can do differently." Hearing those words struck a chord in Marcus. "This is exactly what we need, Officer Carter. We need to work together to address these issues. Your honesty gives us a foundation to build upon." The discussion continued, and by the end of the meeting, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the room. While the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, they had taken the first step toward healing and understanding. The aftermath. The aftermath of the meeting resonated throughout the community, sparking discussions not only about policing, but about the fundamental principles of respect and understanding. The momentum from the rally and the facilitated dialogue had ignited a spark of hope, but Marcus Ellis knew that the work was only beginning. He felt a profound sense of responsibility to maintain that momentum and channel it into meaningful change. In the days following the meeting, Marcus received numerous messages from community members expressing their support and encouragement. Some shared their stories of fear and injustice, while others simply expressed gratitude for his efforts. Yet, amid the positive feedback, there were still pockets of resistance. Social media became a battleground as both supporters and detractors weighed in on the ongoing debate. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone, Marcus stumbled upon a heated thread that included derogatory comments about his character and intentions. The police union had launched a counter-campaign, branding him as a traitor to the badge, and suggesting that he was inciting unrest within the community. Why are they doing this? Marcus wondered aloud, frustration boiling within him. "I'm just trying to foster understanding." Jessica, who had become his closest ally and confidant, sat beside him. "Because change is threatening to those who benefit from the status quo. You're challenging the very foundations of their power, and they're scared." Her words resonated deeply with him. "I understand that, but it's exhausting. I want to focus on positive change, not on fighting against a smear campaign." "You can't let them silence you," she encouraged. "Keep pushing forward. You're making a difference, and people are listening." Fueled by Jessica's unwavering support, Marcus resolved to address the situation head-on. He organized a press conference to clarify his intentions and reaffirm his commitment to fostering positive change within the police force. The aim was to emphasize collaboration rather than confrontation, showcasing the community's desire for reform and accountability. On the day of the press conference, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Journalists from various outlets gathered, eager to hear what Marcus had to say. As he stepped up to the podium, he took a moment to collect his thoughts, knowing that this was an opportunity to shake the narrative. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady yet passionate. "I stand before you not just as a police officer, but as a member of this community who believes in justice, equality, and the power of collaboration. My mission is to foster understanding between law enforcement and the communities we serve. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. I know there are those who believe that my efforts are misguided, but I assure you that I am committed to ensuring that every voice is heard and every concern is addressed. Our goal is not to tear down the police force, but to rebuild it, making it stronger and more accountable to the community it serves. As he spoke, he noticed several officers in the audience nodding in agreement, including Officer Carter. Their presence gave him hope that change was possible, even within the ranks of the police department. Together, we can bridge the gap and create a police force that truly represents and protects all members of our community, he concluded, his words echoing through the room. I invite you all, officers and civilians alike, to join me in this journey of healing and reform. Together, we can be the change we wish to see. The press conference ended on a high note, with journalists eager to report on his message of unity. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, highlighting Marcus's commitment to working collaboratively with the community and addressing the issues of systemic injustice. Despite the success, Marcus knew that this was only a momentary victory. In the days following the conference, he continued to face backlash from the police union, which accused him of betraying his colleagues. However, the tide of public opinion was shifting in his favor, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose. As the weeks passed, Marcus immersed himself in community outreach efforts. He organized workshops focused on building trust between law enforcement and community members. These sessions aimed to educate officers on the experiences of marginalized groups, fostering empathy and understanding. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with both officers and community members participating in open discussions. During one particularly impactful workshop, a local activist named Maria shared her experiences with police interactions. I grew up in this neighborhood, and I've seen how fear can turn into anger. It's not that we don't want law enforcement. It's that we want law enforcement that understands us, she explained passionately. Marcus nodded, grateful for her honesty. That's exactly why we're here, to create a dialogue and bridge the gap. Your voice matters, and it's essential that we listen and learn. The workshop ended with a renewed sense of camaraderie. Officers began to share their own experiences and concerns, revealing the complexities of their roles. Marcus felt a shift in the room. For the first time, they were not just uniforms on opposite sides of the divide, but individuals united in a common goal. However, not everyone was convinced. Despite the progress being made, there remained a faction within the police department that was resistant to change. This faction believed that Marcus's efforts would undermine their authority and create more division than unity. They were vocal in their opposition, spreading rumors and misinformation in an attempt to discredit him. One evening, as Marcus prepared to leave the community center after a long day, he received an anonymous message on social media. You're a disgrace to the badge. You'll regret trying to change things. The threat sent a chill down his spine, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Instead, he reached out to Jessica and David, sharing his concerns. I'm worried that the opposition is getting more aggressive. I can't let this deter me, but I need to be cautious. David offered reassurance. You have every right to be concerned, Marcus. But remember, you're not alone in this. We're all in it together. Feeling fortified by the support of his friends, Marcus resolved to stay the course. He knew that the fight for justice was not without risks, but it was a fight worth engaging in. The community deserved better, and he was determined to be a catalyst for change. As the movement gained traction, Marcus received an unexpected invitation to speak at a national conference on police reform. The opportunity to share his story on a larger platform filled him with excitement and nervousness. He knew that his experience could inspire others and shed light on the urgent need for reform in law enforcement across the nation. On the day of the conference, he arrived at the venue, greeted by a diverse audience eager to hear from various speakers, sharing their experiences and insights. As he took the stage, he felt a mix of nerves and determination. This was his chance to amplify the voices of those who had faced injustice and to advocate for a system that prioritized accountability and respect. "Thank you for having me here today," Marcus began, looking out at the sea of faces. "I stand here not just as a police officer, but as a human being who believes that change is possible when we come together in solidarity." He shared his journey, detailing the encounter that had transformed his life and the movement that had emerged as a result. He spoke of the workshops, the dialogues, and the stories that had inspired him along the way. We cannot continue to turn a blind eye to the injustices that persist in our society. We must hold ourselves accountable and strive for a better future for all. As he concluded his speech, the audience erupted in applause, and he felt a swell of pride and hope. This was more than just a speech. It was a movement that had begun to take shape, fueled by the courage of individuals willing to speak out against injustice. A turning tide. The success of the national conference reverberated throughout the country, inspiring similar movements in cities across America. Social media buzzed with discussions about police reform, community engagement, and the importance of accountability. Marcus Ellis's name became synonymous with change, and he found himself at the center of a growing movement. Despite the progress, however, he knew that the battle was far from over. Back home, the atmosphere within the police department remained tense. While many officers supported Marcus's initiatives, a vocal minority continued to push back. Anonymous threats persisted, but they only fueled Marcus's resolve to effect change. He understood that true progress required facing adversity head-on, and that every ounce of courage he displayed could inspire others to do the same. As the weeks unfolded, a pivotal moment arrived when a local news station approached Marcus to conduct an in-depth interview. The segment aimed to explore his journey, the ongoing movement, and the challenges facing law enforcement. Marcus knew this was an opportunity to share his message with a broader audience, but it also came with risks. On the day of the interview, Marcus prepared meticulously. He wanted to convey not just his experiences, but the collective yearning for change within the community. As he sat in the studio, the anchor's friendly demeanor put him at ease. "Thank you for joining us today, Marcus," the anchor said, her tone warm yet professional. "You've become a leading voice in the conversation about police reform. Can you share what motivated you to take this stand?" Marcus took a deep breath, grateful for the platform. "Thank you for having me. My motivation stems from a desire for justice, not just for myself, but for countless individuals who have experienced injustice at the hands of those sworn to protect them. I've realized that change is not only necessary but achievable when we come together as a community." The interview continued, delving into the complexities of police work and the necessity for reform. Marcus spoke candidly about his experiences, the pressures officers faced, and the importance of empathy and understanding in law enforcement. As the segment aired that evening, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Social media buzzed with support, and the local community expressed pride in having a leader who was unafraid to confront difficult issues. However, not everyone was pleased. That evening, as Marcus returned home, he found a note on his front porch. The paper was crumpled and torn, but the message was clear: "You'll regret this. The badge is not for traitors." A wave of anger coursed through him, but Marcus refused to be intimidated. Instead, he turned to Jessica, who had been by his side throughout the journey. "This is what we're up against," he said, showing her the note. "But we can't back down now." Jessica's expression hardened with determination. "This only proves that you're making waves, Marcus. It's scary, but it's a sign that you're on the right path." With renewed focus, Marcus and Jessica began strategizing for the next steps in their movement. They organized a community forum to address concerns directly, inviting both officers and residents to participate. The goal was to foster understanding and to create an open dialogue about the challenges both sides faced. As the forum approached, anticipation hung in the air. The community had rallied behind Marcus, and interest was high. Flyers were distributed, social media campaigns were launched, and local leaders lent their support. Marcus was determined to make the event a catalyst for change. On the day of the forum, the atmosphere was electric. Residents packed the community center, filling the seats and spilling into the aisles. Marcus stood before the crowd, feeling the weight of expectation. He had come to represent a shift, a new narrative for the relationship between law enforcement and the community. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, looking out at the diverse faces in the crowd. "This forum is an opportunity for us to share our experiences, to listen, and to grow together. I want us to have an honest conversation about the challenges we face and how we can work towards a better future for everyone." As the evening progressed, the discussions ranged from personal stories to systemic issues. Community members shared their fears, their encounters with law enforcement, and their hopes for change. Officers, including some of Marcus's colleagues, spoke about the pressures they faced on the job and their desire to serve the community effectively. The dialogue was candid, at times uncomfortable, but ultimately productive. During one particularly poignant moment, an elderly woman stood up, her hands shaking as she addressed the crowd. "I'm afraid of the police," she admitted, her voice trembling. "My grandson was treated unfairly during a traffic stop. I want to feel safe, not scared." Tears filled Marcus's eyes as he listened to her story. "Your fear is valid," he replied gently. "We need to do better as a police force. Your voice matters, and we're here to listen." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a wave of unity wash over the room. In that moment, he realized that this forum was more than just a conversation. It was a healing space where both sides could find common ground. However, not all attendees were receptive. A small group of individuals, aligned with the police union's resistance, shouted their dissent from the back of the room, attempting to derail the discussion. They accused Marcus of undermining the police force and causing division. "Enough," shouted Jessica, stepping forward. "This is not about division. It's about coming together to create a better system. You can either be part of the solution or remain part of the problem." Her passionate words silenced the dissenters, and the community rallied behind her. "We want to be heard. We want change." The audience chanted, their voices echoing throughout the hall. As the night wore on, Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of hope. Despite the challenges, the community was united in their desire for change. Together, they crafted action plans, setting tangible goals for reform and accountability within the police department. After the forum, Marcus received countless messages of gratitude and support. People were eager to join the movement, willing to contribute their time and resources to make a difference. Yet, in the shadows, the police union continued to plot their counterattack, determined to maintain their grip on power. In the weeks that followed, the momentum built. Marcus and Jessica worked tirelessly, organizing workshops, town hall meetings, and outreach programs. The police department began implementing changes, including diversity training and community engagement initiatives. But as Marcus navigated the challenges of reform, the opposing faction grew bolder. Threats became more frequent, and one evening, Marcus received an anonymous tip about a planned protest against him. "They're planning something," he told Jessica, concern etched on his face. "We need to be prepared." "Let's counter it with a community event," Jessica suggested. "We can showcase the positive changes and show that we're not afraid." The idea resonated with Marcus, and they quickly organized a community connection day, inviting everyone to come together to celebrate the progress made and to foster continued dialogue. Local businesses, community organizations, and law enforcement would collaborate to create a day of unity. On the day of the event, the park buzzed with energy. Families set up picnic blankets, children played games, and booths were filled with information about community resources and support systems. Marcus stood at the entrance, welcoming attendees, his heart swelling with pride. As the day unfolded, community members engaged with officers, sharing laughter and stories. The atmosphere was charged with positivity, and Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. Yet, he remained aware that the battle for change was ongoing. Suddenly, in the midst of the festivities, A group of protesters arrived, carrying signs that read "No more lies" and "Protect our police." The tension in the air shifted as attendees turned to face the newcomers. The police officers present exchanged nervous glances, but Marcus remained calm. He stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "I understand that not everyone here agrees with the changes we're implementing. I respect your right to voice your opinions, but today is about unity and understanding. Let's have a conversation rather than a confrontation." His words seemed to resonate, and some protesters lowered their signs, willing to engage in dialogue. The atmosphere shifted as people began to speak with one another, sharing their perspectives. The day ended with a sense of camaraderie, demonstrating that while differences existed, they could be bridged through conversation and mutual respect. Marcus realized that this was not just a victory for him, but for everyone striving for a more equitable and just society. As he packed up his things that evening, Marcus reflected on how far they had come. The journey was fraught with challenges, but he knew they were making a difference, one conversation at a time. The fight for justice was ongoing, but he was no longer fighting alone. The shadow of resistance. Despite the progress and unity demonstrated during Community Connection Day, the undercurrents of resistance did not dissipate. In the weeks that followed, the police union and its supporters continued to mobilize against Marcus, determined to quash the reforms he was championing. Their tactics grew bolder, employing social media campaigns filled with misinformation, painting Marcus as a traitor to the badge and an enemy of law enforcement. One evening, Marcus and Jessica sat in their living room, poring over social media posts and comments. "Look at this," Jessica said, her voice tinged with frustration. "They're claiming that you're putting officers' lives at risk by pushing for these changes. It's all lies." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I expected pushback, but this is different. They're trying to manipulate the narrative and scare people into thinking change is dangerous." Jessica nodded, her eyes fierce. "We need to counter this. If we don't address these lies, they'll take root and spread." Determined to set the record straight, Marcus decided to hold a press conference. He knew that transparency was key to rebuilding trust with the community and law enforcement. He wanted to show that reform wasn't about undermining the police, but about creating a better system for everyone. As the press conference day approached, Marcus worked diligently to prepare. He gathered statistics on police-community interactions, success stories from other cities that had implemented reforms, and testimonials from officers who supported the changes. He wanted to ensure that the narrative surrounding his efforts was rooted in facts and supported by real experiences. On the day of the press conference, a mix of excitement and anxiety filled the air. Reporters, community members, and officers gathered in a local auditorium. As Marcus stepped up to the podium, he took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice firm yet compassionate. "I know there are many misconceptions about the changes we're advocating for, and I want to take this opportunity to clarify our goals and intentions." He laid out the statistics, highlighting the benefits of community-oriented policing and the importance of accountability. Reform is not about removing the badge. It's about ensuring that every officer is held to the highest standards of integrity and that every community member feels safe and respected, he asserted. As he spoke, he noticed a few officers in the audience nodding in agreement, their expressions supportive. However, he also saw a handful of dissenters, arms crossed, clearly unconvinced. Change can be uncomfortable, but it is essential for growth. We must listen to our community's concerns and work together to create a safer environment for everyone, he concluded, his gaze sweeping across the room. After the press conference, the response was mixed. Many applauded Marcus for his honesty and commitment, while others in the police union labeled him as a dangerous idealist. Social media buzzed with varying opinions, but the most concerning aspect was the emergence of threats directed at Marcus. He received anonymous messages warning him to back off or face severe consequences. One evening, As Marcus and Jessica were reviewing plans for their next community outreach event, the atmosphere shifted. The tension in the room grew palpable as Marcus shared the latest threats he had received. "Look at this," he said, showing Jessica a particularly menacing message. "They say they're going to make me pay for my betrayal." Jessica's face hardened. "This isn't just online chatter anymore. We need to take this seriously. You're putting yourself in danger." Marcus nodded, aware of the gravity of the situation. "I won't be intimidated. We're fighting for something bigger than ourselves." Jessica reached for his hand, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "I understand that, but we need to have a plan in place. We can't ignore the reality of the threats." After discussing their options, they decided to reach out to local law enforcement leadership, requesting increased security measures for Marcus and his family. They also implemented personal safety precautions, like varying their daily routines and avoiding predictable patterns. As they prepared for their next community event, a series of town halls focused on police-community relations, Marcus felt both empowered and anxious. He knew that while they were making progress, the resistance would not back down without a fight. Part 8. Uniting for Justice. The Town Hall series aimed to bring community members and officers together for open discussions. Each event was designed to address specific issues, such as mental health resources for officers, community policing initiatives, and strategies for reducing crime while enhancing community trust. The first town hall took place in a local community center, and the turnout exceeded all expectations. Families filled the seats, eager to participate in the conversation. As Marcus stepped up to speak, he felt the weight of the moment. This was more than just an event. It was a chance to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice resonating with determination. "We are here to discuss how we can work together to create a safer, more just community for everyone." The discussions were robust, with both residents and officers sharing their perspectives. As the night unfolded, a sense of camaraderie emerged, and people began to recognize that their shared goal was to improve the community. However, during the second town hall, tensions flared. A group of protesters, aligned with the police union, arrived, brandishing signs that read "Protect our police" and "Stop the lies." They disrupted the meeting, shouting accusations and attempting to drown out Marcus's voice. "Enough," Marcus exclaimed, his patience wearing thin. "This is not a battle. We are all here for the same reason: to make our community better. Let's have a civil conversation." After a tense standoff, some community members stepped forward to support Marcus, urging the protesters to listen. "We want change, but we also want to support our officers. Let's find a way to do both," one man shouted, prompting murmurs of agreement from the audience. Slowly, the tension began to ease as dialogue resumed. By the end of the night, the protesters, while still skeptical, found themselves engaging in conversations with community members and officers. It was a small victory, but Marcus recognized it as a crucial step forward. Part 9. A breakthrough moment. As the town halls continued, Marcus began to notice a shift in the community's attitude. People who had previously been divided started to come together. There was still resistance, but it felt less intimidating. A growing number of officers expressed their support for the reforms, understanding that the changes were not an attack on their roles, but rather an enhancement of their duties. In the midst of this progress, Marcus received a call from Chief Miller, who had remained largely silent throughout the reform discussions. "Marcus, can we meet?" the chief asked, his tone serious. Marcus agreed, curious about what Chief Miller wanted to discuss. They met at a local diner, the atmosphere casual yet charged with tension. "I've been watching what you're doing," the chief began, glancing around as if to ensure no one was listening. "I won't lie. I was skeptical at first, but I've seen how much support you've garnered from the community." "Thank you, Chief," Marcus replied, cautiously optimistic. "I think we can create real change if we work together." The chief nodded, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. The pressure from the union is intense. They're not happy with the direction things are going. I want to support your efforts, but I need to tread carefully. Understandable, Marcus said, but we can't let fear dictate our actions. We need your leadership to push for reform from within the department. The chief leaned back, considering Marcus's words. I'm willing to support you publicly, but I need you to ensure that community members are involved in the discussions. Transparency is key. Marcus felt a surge of hope. Absolutely. We want everyone's voice to be heard. In the following weeks, Marcus and Chief Miller worked to establish a community advisory board made up of residents, officers, and community leaders. The board would serve as a platform for ongoing dialogue and accountability, ensuring that the community's needs were prioritized. As the board took shape, the community's enthusiasm grew. The people felt empowered, and Marcus sensed that a new era was beginning, a time when community and law enforcement could work hand in hand.